Good morning, students. Hope all of you are fine. Beta, this lecture is also in continuation of revision of chapter 11, and name of this chapter is Rebels and the Raj. In previous lecture we discussed about the different reasons of revolt of 1857, like how these rebels they declared their leaders, national leaders as well as the regional leaders, and how the rumor spread and what was the line of communication for them during this revolt. So today we will read about the revolt in Avadh. As you know that Avadh was annexed on the basis of misgovernance in 1856, and in Indian British Army so many soldiers they were recruited from Avadh. So in Avadh it was greatly resisted, this annexation, and further when this revolt took place, then also it was very much intense in Avadh. So today we will do this topic, that Avadh in revolt. A cherry that will drop into our mouth one day, but these lines these were said by Lord Dalhousie. He was the Governor General. He described the kingdom of Avadh as a cherry that will drop into our mouth one day. Means today or tomorrow Avadh will be under the British rule. And 5 years later, in 1856, the kingdom was formally annexed to the British Empire. And this conquest, it happened in stages. Like the Subsidiary Alliance, it had been imposed on Avadh in 1801. So first of all, we should know then what do we mean by Subsidiary Alliance. It was the system that was devised by Lord Wellesley in 1798, and all those who entered in such an alliance with the British, they had to accept the certain terms and conditions. Like the first condition was the British would be responsible for protecting their ally from external and internal threats to the power. It means that particular territory it will be protected by the Britishers from any kind of attacks. And in the territory of the ally, a British armed contingent would be stationed. One British official was stationed in the ruler court, and he was known as the resident. Then the ally would have to provide the resources for maintaining this contingent. Means the expenses to maintain that British army that will be borne by ruler, and the ally could enter into agreements with other rulers or engage in warfare only with the permission of the British. It means after entering into subsidiary alliance, Indian ruler they cannot declare any war or they cannot sign any agreement or treaty with other rulers. So it means it was just like that Indian ruler has to work under the Britishers. So this was the system of subsidiary alliance, and it was imposed on Avadh in 1801. And by the terms of this alliance, the Nawab had to disband his military force. Now, because the army that was kept in Avadh, it was British army, and now this Nawab had to act in accordance with the advice of the British, and the resident, the British official, he was also attached to the court. And Nawab he became dependent on the British to maintain law and order even within the kingdom also. And even he could no longer exert control over the rebellious chiefs and talukdar, because everything that was controlled by the Britishers. And even in the meantime, Britishers they became very much interested to annex the territory of Avadh. They felt that because the soil of Avadh was very good, very fertile for producing indigo and cotton, and as we know that these British people they just want cash crops, they want raw material to be sent to Britain. That is why, and even all the major areas of India had been conquered till 1850, and like the Doab, the Carnatic, Punjab and Bengal. So the takeover of Avadh in 1856 was expected to complete a process of territorial annexation. that had begun with the conquest of Bengal almost a century earlier. But as we know, the conquest of Bengal started from 1757, and Awadh was annexed almost 100 years later of that. So this way, Awadh was annexed on the issue of misgovernance by these British people. Now the next topic is about the life was gone out of the body. As you know that Lord Dalhousie, he just introduced a very strong policy of annexation. So but now this annexation, it created disaffection in all the areas that were annexed, but it was too much in the kingdom of Awadh. Here Nawab Wazid Ali Shah, he was dethroned, he was removed from the rule and exiled to Calcutta on the plea that the region was being misgoverned. As I was telling you that the reason was given of misgovernance. But on the contrary, he was widely loved by his subjects, and even when he left his beloved Lucknow, there were so many people who followed him to the way to Kanpur singing the songs, and there was a widespread sense of grief and loss at the Nawab's exile, and it was recorded by many observers. It means he was a beloved by the people. So here or people, one of them also wrote the life was gone out of the body, and the body of this town had been left lifeless. Means it they gave so much importance to this Nawab Wazid Ali Shah, and even means everywhere there was the scene of sorrow. And even one folk song also demand that the honorable English came and took the country. So this way, the removal of the Nawab led to the dissolution of the court and its culture also. And as you know, in the royal courts, so many musicians, poets, artisans, administrative officials, they were recruited. Now all of them, they also lost their livelihood. So that is why this was greatly resisted in Awadh. Now the next topic is about the Firangi Raj and the end of the world. So as we have till now we have read that how the people, they were against the British. Now a chain of grievances in Awadh linked Prince, Talukdar, peasant and Sepoy. Now because as you know that Prince, he was also affected by that. Talukdar, they were the person, earlier they hold a very strong place in the rule. Peasants, they were also against this Firangi Raj. So in different ways they came to identify Firangi Raj with the end of their world and the breakdown of the things they valued. So this was a complex of emotions and issues. Traditions and loyalties worked themselves out in the revolt of 1857. So because all the categories of the people from Awadh, they were against this Firangi Raj. So that is why they just put their best efforts in the revolt of 1857. And in Awadh, more than anywhere else, the revolt became an expression of popular resistance. If we compare revolt in Awadh with the other area, here it was very much, intensity was very high. Even the annexation displays not just the Nawab. अगर हम बात करते हैं like annexation of Awadh की, not only the Nawab was displaced, it also dispossessed the Talukdar of the regions. Beta Talukdar, they were the persons who owned the very large area of land. So many villages they have. Like some of them, they enjoy they maintain the army also with them. Like few talukdars were there who has the army of 12,000 foot soldiers, and other they have the army of 200 foot soldiers. It means these talukdar from many generations, they had controlled land and power in the countryside. And before the coming of the British, Talukdar maintained armed retainers. They built forts also, and they enjoyed a different kind of independence, autonomy. and as long as they accepted the sovereignty of the Nawab and paid the revenue of their taluks, means these talukdars, they had to maintain all that area, and they had to pay a tribute to the Nawab. So even the British were unwilling to tolerate the power of the talukdars. Immediately after the annexation, the talukdar were disarmed and their forts destroyed. So this way, this class was also against the Britishers. And even the British land revenue policy further undermined the position and authority of the talukdars, because earlier the tax was collected by land revenue was collected by these talukdars, but after annexation the first British revenue settlement, known as the summary settlement of 1856, was based on the assumption that talukdars were interlopers with no permanent stakes in land. Means they declared that these talukdars, they don't have any right on the land. And even this summary settlement proceeded to remove the talukdar wherever possible. So in pre-British time, talukdar, they had held 67% of the total number of villages in Avadh, but after this summary settlement it just come down to 38%. So the talukdars of southern Avadh, they were the hardest hit, and some of them, they just lost more than half of the total number of villages they had. So we can imagine that how much they were affected by this summary settlement. And even the British land revenue officers, according to them, by removing talukdar, they would be able to settle the land with the actual owners. But this didn't happen in practice, because the revenue flows for the state increased but the burden of demand on the peasant did not decline. Officials soon found that the large areas of Awadh were heavily over-assessed. Means what they found, that already they were charging more taxes. So thus neither talukdar nor peasant had any reason to be happy with the annexation, because when the talukdar, they were having this authority, then sometime in the case of crop failure or any natural calamity, they just provide a comfort to these peasants. But the dispossession of talukdar meant the breakdown of an entire social order, and the loyalty and the patronage that had bound the peasant to the talukdar, it was also disrupted. In the pre-British time, talukdars were oppressor, but many of them also appeared to be generous father figures. Means some of them, they were also known as the exploitators of peasant. But some of them, they had a very good relation with the peasants, and even whenever they need, they just help them in the times of need also. So this way, there was no longer any guarantee that in times of hardship or crop failure, the revenue demand of the state would be reduced or the collection will be postponed. And even at the time of the festivities, the peasant would get the loan and support that the talukdar had earlier provided. It means these talukdar and peasants, they were also sharing a bond, sharing a relation within the society. But now this was also changed. And even the grievances of peasants were carried over into the sepoy lines. Like if we see, the sepoys were recruited from the villages of Avadh, and even for decades the sepoys had complained of low levels of pay and difficulty of getting leave. Like जो Indian sepoy थे, they also have so many grievances against the British rule. So even the relationship of the sepoys with their superior white officers underwent a significant change in the years preceding the uprising of 1857. It means the relation between these Indian sepoys with the British officers, it was also not good. In 1820, white officers, they just maintained friendly relation with the sepoys, like they would take part in the leisure activities, they wrestled with them, fenced with them, and many of them were fluent in Hindustani language also, and they were also familiar with the customs and culture. But in the 1840s, this just system began to change. Now these British officers, they developed a sense of superiority and starting treating the sepoys as their racial inferiors. It means there was racial discrimination now. So abuse and physical violence became common, and thus the distance between sepoys and officers grew. So this way, beta, now all these were the grievances of Indian sepoys against the Britishers. And there is one very important thing, that there were the close links existed between the sepoys and the rural world of North India, because the large majority of the sepoys of the Bengal army, they were recruited from the villages of Avadh and eastern Uttar Pradesh, and many of them were Brahmins or from the upper caste. Awadh was in fact called the nursery of the Bengal army, because most of the Indian sepoys in Bengal army, they were recruited from Awadh. And the changes that the families of the sepoys saw around them and the threats they perceived were quickly transmitted to the sepoy lines. As you know that the incident from where this rumor started, that was a Brahman and a person, right? So from there, this thing, it just spreaded in all the Brahman sepoys. And this link between the sepoys and the rural world had important implication in the course of the uprising. When the sepoys defied their superior officers and took up arms, they were joined very swiftly by their fellow friends in the villages. And everywhere, peasants poured into the towns and joined the soldiers. And even and the ordinary people of the towns in collective act of rebellion. But this way, the ordinary person, they also joined in this rebellion to just make this rebellion successful. That is why this was the reason, because this rebellion, it was not only participated by the sepoys, even the masses also, they were also the part of this rebel. That is why this revolt, it is known as the first war of independence. So hope all of you have understood the topic. Thank you and have a nice day.